listening to Community Forum on KCCC 930 AM, sponsored by Eddy County, honoring God, country, and family, thriving with industry since 1889.
Thank you for listening to Community Forum. My name is Johnny Chandler, the owner of KCCC 930 AM, the host of Community Forum. With me today is Paul Gessing. Paul Gessing is the president of the Rio Grande Foundation, a nonpartisan think tank based in Albuquerque that holds every agency of the state accountable, in my opinion. Paul, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Johnny. Good to be back with you in this very busy time for us here at the Rio Grande Foundation.
Yeah, so it's kind of the middle of the 60-day 2025 legislative session. We're going to get to that here in a minute. We're going to run down of the session, maybe the fact that there's a lack of progress. There's a lot of talk about a very large tax increase in the form of Family Medical Leave Act, but we'll get to all that in a second. But let's go ahead and start with what we know. Our state's dead last in education. We used to be able to feel really great about saying that we were better than Mississippi, but that's long gone now. So let's just start us off with that.
Yeah, unfortunately, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, known as the NAEP or the Nation's Report Card, comes out every 2 years. There was a little bit of a hiccup during COVID. Folks may remember that those results were out in October of 2022 in the waning days of the gubernatorial campaign between Mark Ronchetti and Lujan Grisham. We were dead last in all four categories then. And sadly, New Mexico remains dead last in the 2024 version of the NAEP, which was released just a few weeks ago in January of this year. And this is a test, like I said, only comes out every 2 years. It's one of those benchmarks that we at the Rio Grande Foundation really look forward to every time it does come out, because it's important information. This is part of, it's two of the variables in the Kids Count report that Voices for Children and NEKC publishes. It's in every educational ranking because this is the test. This is the one that really shows not state standards, because those change, from administration to administration. And they're hard to compare or impossible to compare between states across the board. This is the test that really highlights how New Mexico students are doing. And sadly, the answer is not good. And not only that, we have very strong evidence to show that what the governor did in terms of the COVID lockdowns had particularly bad results for New Mexico students. So real quick, the subject areas or the areas studied are fourth grade reading, fourth grade math, eighth grade reading, and eighth grade math. And as I said, New Mexico was dead last in each of those four categories. Out of 52 jurisdictions studied, Washington, D.C. and DOD or Defense Department schools. So really tragic results, to say the least.
So let me ask you a question then real quick, I suppose. Like, this is not a surprise. These results, are they a surprise for the state of New Mexico?
They are not, in the sense that we were dead last in the last results, 2022. We've always been towards the bottom. But let me run through real quick fourth grade reading, which, it's kind of like all of your children, you love them equally, but fourth grade reading is kind of the most important of the four metrics. It's one that, if you recall, the Susana Martinez administration, that she focused on particularly. Why did she do that? Well, because if you're not able to read by fourth grade, you're going to be in trouble across the board. You're not going to be able to read a word problem in your math class. You're not going to be able to read a history textbook. You're not going to be able to read science material if you cannot read. And so fourth grade reading was an area that the former Governor Martinez really focused on improving. She was brought by us at the Rio Grande Foundation a model that had come out of Florida in the Jeb Bush administration. So going back quite a number of years here, that really had magical, if you will, impressive impacts in Florida. Other states have latched onto it in more recent years, and you mentioned Mississippi. and I'm going to go through that briefly. But now other states, including Louisiana, another traditional bottom performer in education, have embraced Mississippi, the Mississippi, Florida, et cetera, the model that's worked. Let's put it that way. New Mexico, we didn't go along with the Martinez Mississippi, Florida model. We in the legislature said we want to stick with the way things are going, and they rejected it. So, real quick, in 2011, Mississippi outperformed New Mexico by 1 point, 209 to 208 on fourth grade reading. That swiftly became a bigger difference over time, so that by 2019, Mississippi, having started this process with reforming their reading, their approach to reading, phonics-based, eliminating social promotion, training teachers how to teach reading, those kind of things, and more, they outperformed New Mexico by 2019, 219 to 208. So they opened up an 11-point gap over New Mexico in 2019 on what you would call the eve of COVID. Well, then COVID happened. Mississippi fell back a couple points. In 2022, that it was 217 to 202, but they actually grew their difference between New Mexico because New Mexico fell backward by 6 points. Now in 2024, Mississippi rebounded. They're back up to 219. New Mexico fell even further. They're down at 201. So now, after a decade and a half, they started at essentially the same level. Mississippi is now outperforming New Mexico by 18 points and is very much in the middle of the pack when it comes to their fourth grade reading scores. New Mexico remains, as I said, at the very, very bottom. There is hope. I don't want people to give up hope, though one of the interesting, I think, areas of this report is that they actually look at performance of Catholic schools. Catholic schools embrace the NAEP test and are taking it. And Catholic schools, according to the results, outperform traditional public schools by about 2 grade levels. That's 2 grade levels. So that's nationwide, and that's just phenomenal, which shows that there are models that can work all across our country. Not surprisingly, the focus has to be on choice, accountability, empowering students and families to choose the education model that works best for them, and then holding the system accountable. Doesn't necessarily involve spending a lot more money. New Mexico's done that and continues to do that without success. So that is unfortunately the depressing news when it comes to this National Assessment of Educational Progress and our education outcomes in the state.
All right, that was a lot of information there, Paul. It brought me back a little bit. Obviously, you were advocating for school choice with the Catholic schools now taking those and being 2 grade levels higher. You're obviously calling for that, and you have before in the past. But I was in a newsroom in Albuquerque during the Martinez administration, and when she tried to appoint or attempted to appoint Hannah Scandera to the Secretary of Education. And I'm just going to tell you this, as a person that was in the newsroom, and I can't remember, I think it was at Channel 13 and Channel 4 both kind of during that time. I don't think Hannah Scandera was ever confirmed by the legislature, if I remember. So she was a secretary designate, I believe.
Correct.
And then I'm just going to tell you, the sentiment inside the newsroom about like how awful and bad the education system that they're trying to bring to New Mexico was. Just like, sitting around in an editorial meeting, and I sat in editorial meetings for 20 years in Albuquerque, right? You sit around this editorial meeting, you got multiple voices, everybody's opinion gets heard, and there was always like, we have to do something negative on this. We have to do something negative on social promotion, right? Why does nobody talk about social promotion in the state of New Mexico anymore? Right? Because nobody's trying to stop social promotion anymore. Remember the big thing, fourth grade reading, but it was hold the student back at the third grade to catch him up or her up so whenever they hit the fourth grade, they're on the same level. And the third grade was also determined when it's a good time to do social promotion because it doesn't mess up yourself socially for the rest of somebody's life, essentially. So there's a whole lot there. And it's really just kind of disappointing that we've only regressed since the Martinez administration, and then no governor, in my opinion, has ever really been, you can correct me if I'm wrong, has never really been given the opportunity to really dive in and help New Mexico's education system without too much interference.
No, and we could go deep into media bias and the problems with, not having people who really understand public policy in the media. And you, I'm sure, were an exception to that. But
Naturally.
unfortunately, a lot of folks like yourself get frustrated and get out of it because they're sick of being the only voice of sanity in some of these places. But uh, we, worked with Susana Martinez. We definitely wanted her to push more on the choice aspect because I think that was a clearer and more popular with the average person, rather than technocratic reforms, which ultimately what she did was a technocratic reform. But the accountability aspect of eliminating social promotion, for example, is not anti-education, anti-teacher, anti-school district. You're simply giving the district another chance to help that child succeed so that they're not struggling to read down the road in their lifetimes. And it's kind of frustrating and shocking that the unions push back so strong against that and continue to oppose that kind of thing. But yeah, the Mississippi, the Florida model, those states are leaving New Mexico in the dust. Of course, we talk a lot about Mississippi when it comes to these results because they struggle with some of the same socioeconomic challenges that we face, but the difference is they are doing things about it in Mississippi. Now, I want to pivot slightly on this education issue to another aspect of it, which focuses on some remarks that the governor made. She was doing a interview with Channel 7, KOAT, the Albuquerque Journal, and KKOB Radio. It was an hour-long, I don't want to call it a town hall because I don't think the public got to ask these questions, but it was more focused on just asking the governor what her plans are for the next 2 years and her frustrations on various issues, what she's trying to do, what she's failed to do. One thing that I wanted to note on that is that the governor was rebuffed on the 4-day, 5-day school week. We've talked about that at length on the show.
Yeah.
A judge ruled that the governor's attempt to force 5-day school weeks on New Mexico districts, especially rural ones, was illegal, and that she hadn't gotten the authority from the legislature to do that. So with that being the premise, here are a few quotes. And it's fascinating because the governor, she seems to be at odds with the progressives who rebuffed her during her special session last summer, but she doesn't really understand, I don't think, or care to understand some of the issues. Now, here's some direct quotes. This is from the Albuquerque Journal. This is the governor speaking. I have no power over schools. In the same way, I can't tell judges what they should sentence, nor can I tell a police officer who to arrest.
I mean, I'm going to stop you right there. That's a crazy quote. Who thinks that?
Well, I have jokingly said that if somebody did a Pinocchio ometer for Michelle Lujan Grisham, her nose wouldn't stop growing until it's taller than she is. So it's absolutely mind-blowingly untrue for her to say that. Then she said, this is where she actually does start to make sense. She blamed Senate and House Education Committee chairs, which are both led by current or retired teachers and have bottled up many education initiatives in recent years. Now, we could talk about those education initiatives or lack thereof. I have a feeling she's talking about this 4-day, 5-day school week issue. But then she goes on to say, and these are quotes, you've got a lot of former educators and superintendents who aren't interested in changing anything. And then she called it unethical and a huge conflict of interest for current and former educators to be voting on education funding and other initiatives as legislators. So she goes from one of the biggest lies I've ever heard a politician say to actually making a lot of sense. Now, the only question I have for the governor, and I'll ask it of you, what education initiatives is she talking about? Because nothing that I believe, nothing that anybody I think really looks at what has been proposed in the last 7 years by this governor that's going to massively move the needle on education reform and education performance. So I don't understand where she's getting that, but she is absolutely correct that these people, and I'll mention Cheryl Williams Stapleton. Of course,
Yeah, of
she was
course.
uh, a representative, a powerful Democrat in the legislature who apparently has not served jail time. She's not been convicted yet, but she's very much been accused of some very real stealing from Albuquerque public schools. And she also was, one of those defenders of the status quo in education, just pour money into it. Well, that entire process and that approach is one that I think starts from Michelle Lujan Grisham all the way down in terms of the Democratic Party and their dominance right now in New Mexico. And so I haven't seen any reforms bottled up, but that being said, there are big problems with having some of these people who are employed by the education system, which is funded by the state, and then they're voting on policies in Santa Fe, including funding. It's a real issue.
I would say that, in my opinion, Lieutenant Governor Howie Morales isn't a former educator. He spent a lot of time in the classroom. He is somebody that has lived that system. I'm not saying that, sometimes the person that was in it the whole time is the right person, but he does understand education in New Mexico and probably has a pretty good idea of where it was failing. If I was the governor, I'd probably try to throw it on his plate because he knows what it's like to be in a classroom and then supervise it from there. That's just my opinion. But we have a really valuable asset, I think, as Lieutenant Governor who grew up in the New Mexico education system, taught in it. And I don't know if his opinion is being utilized at all. It's probably the most quiet Lieutenant Governor I can ever remember hearing in the history of New Mexico.
Very true. And I think that's one of the questions is that, once you spend enough time in a particular system, you tend to view the world through the eyes of that system itself and its interests. Now, thankfully, Howie Morales is not taking a paycheck from school districts that he used to work for. He's working as lieutenant governor. So he may not have some of those same reasons to defend the status quo. However, as I've said on this program and numerous others, the Democratic Party, especially here in New Mexico, is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the unions. So anyone who ultimately is being put in office and given campaign donations and grassroots support by these unions is going to largely defend their interests, which is pretty much to keep the system status quo and to pour more money into it. So until the voters decide that they want to see reform and a path to success for education, we are going to remain very close to the bottom in terms of educational outcomes. And I would just note that while there have been a number of school choice oriented bills of various stripes introduced in the legislative session, nothing happening in this 60-day session, which of course is the real opportunity to put forth some bold ideas and have them debated in a longer session. Nothing that's happening in this session is really going to move the needle, at least nothing I've seen as we, like you said, just hit the halfway point.
Right. So let me ask you one more question on the education thing, and then we'll move on to the legislative session a little more in depthly. Sure. But this NAOP, right? This what is it? The National Assessment of Education Progress, the educational progress.
NAEP, yes, National Assessment of Educational Progress.
Got it. Cool. Okay, I wrote that note down right. So my question is, that's a federally funded U.S. Department of Education applied test.
It is.
Right.
Yeah.
So if the Department of Education is dissolved at the federal level, New Mexico's I don't know. I'm not asking your opinion about the Department of Education and whether it should live on a federal level or not, but how does this test exist for comparison with other states if the Department of Education no longer exists?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few duties of the Department of Education that I think are worth carrying forth, regardless of whether the department exists or not. This is certainly one of them. There's a lot of, the bulk of their billions of dollars in their budget is money that comes down for various programs in various, Title IX and some of these programs for impoverished school areas, school districts. That's a different story, but the NAEP hopefully will continue into the future. It certainly is the best accountability tool and the best measuring stick for New Mexico and other states and even school districts to really figure out how they're actually doing. Because those state level tests, you can imagine it's pretty difficult to get agreement from politicians in 50 states, 25 states, even 10 states to say, okay, we're not going to do anything differently. We're going to have the same basic test, and we really want accountability. And that's, just one of the fundamental problems of putting a state in charge of education. I'm on the board of a charter school that there are branches similar to it in other states, and they have at your fingertips comparisons between how New Mexico students are performing and how students in the other areas of the country where this charter school has a presence are. Unfortunately, government is a whole different ballgame, and they're not so inclined to that kind of accountability, especially here in New Mexico, where we're constantly at the very, very bottom. And so having that laid bare every 2 years is something that I can see politicians in New Mexico not wanting to have happen. But hopefully Trump will be smart about this and will retain the NAEP in some form or function, no matter what agency it's under.
Okay. Well, you answered that question exactly how I thought you. I actually know that's not what I thought. I thought you would absolutely, and your organization would be in favor of abolishing the Department of Education on a federal level. So I found it a little bit interesting that you think that there are some great things in there that you would like to continue. So you don't believe that the whole Department of Education on a federal level should be dissolved. You just think obviously there's tons of ways that could be cut back so significantly.
Absolutely, yeah. We won't get into the whole department, and I really am not that familiar with the whole department. Education remains a state level priority. Most of the money, most of the policies are made at the state level. Obviously, some states are more locally controlled. Obviously, that varies by state. New Mexico is one of the more centrally controlled and centrally funded states, and that goes back to lawsuits that were undertaken back in the late 70s and 80s because of the wide differences in, kind of industrial levels and poverty levels. As you can imagine, Carlsbad and southeast New Mexico having more resources available thanks to the oil and gas industry. A lot of the more impoverished school districts did not have the tax base in order to fund their education systems. Now, personally, I think that is one of many, many problems with our school funding mechanism and the lack of accountability. Once you put a funding formula in place and you take resources from the haves and give it to the have-nots with very little accountability, I think that's a huge problem. But yeah, it's not, we just since we've talked last, Tennessee and Idaho both are moving towards universal school choice in the form of education savings accounts or something like that within their state. So Tennessee and Idaho, Tennessee's adopted it. It's been signed into law. Idaho's on the verge. Texas is looking to be the 15th state to adopt universal school choice. And while we could spend our political capital and time focusing on local control, across the board, and that is something that we do work on. But the real, I think, win for New Mexico kids would be broad-based school choice and empowering the parents. That's where we can actually move the needle. And unfortunately, we're just a long way from that. We need political change in Santa Fe and the legislature.
Yeah, we're a pretty long way. So political change in Santa Fe and the legislature. I do believe that there are a lot of new legislators this year for this session. Is that true?
Oh, there's a pretty good number. Several folks from the House, especially on the Republican side, moved up to the Senate. as you know, Jim Townsend,
Yeah.
Candy Azell, a handful of folks from Southeast New Mexico, Larry Scott moved up. But yeah, there are plenty of new faces and new names, and quite frankly, she probably doesn't encapsulate Carlsbad, but Elaine Sena Cortez from Hobbs is one of the people who I'm really excited to do a lot of work with, and she's a really strong voice for conservative principles up in Santa Fe. So she's definitely a name out of that new legislator list that I've really enjoyed working with already.
Yeah, I think I'm following her on X, and I'm not even sure how I came across it, but I'm following her on X, and she's definitely out there. She seems to be saying some pretty common sense things, in my opinion.
Definitely.
All right, so let's run down where we're at on the legislative session so far. We're about halfway through. Do we have anything, in your opinion, that is good or bad or just okay? I mean, where are we at? I'm not really paying that much of attention.
Well, if you frame it like that, we have plenty that's good, bad, and ugly in terms of where things are going. We came into the session and I talked extensively about paid family leave. When I talked to you last, that's HB 11. After it flew through its first committee in the House, it slowed down dramatically and was ultimately amended fairly significantly, including receiving a new name. Although the bill number is the same, it is now called the Welcome Child and Family Wellness Leave Act. It does reduce the tax paid by businesses and individuals somewhat. It now is 6 weeks per year of leave instead of 12 weeks in general, except for child. Now they added a new $3,000 welcome child refund that will be paid out for 3 months. So total of $9,000 upon the birth or adoption of a child. And there's a lot to this plan. It's still a huge tax increase. It's still something that I think is really problematic. And one of the biggest problems is that we don't have good analysis of this legislation in terms of its financial solvency. There's just very little analysis that we've seen so far to say that, yeah, they're going to be able to pay out the expected benefits with the money that's put into the system. And even the legislature's own fiscal impact report notes that Washington State increased their rate of taxation from 0.4% to 0.92% since the program was begun due to the high usage of the plan. And they expect that it'll hit the statutory cap of 1.2% in just a couple years. So other states have seen rate increases as well. And knowing the way New Mexico and the legislature and the Democrats do things, I think they're going to quickly run into solvency issues because they're trying to ram this thing through for obvious political reasons, not because this is the best idea for New Mexicans.
We have a state. We have a
then
state sick. Sorry, Paul. We have a statewide sick leave policy already, do we not?
we do,
Right.
yes.
And so, make no mistake, this is a tax increase when we are on the heels of yet another record budget year.
Exactly. So this bill passed. I was up Santa Fe yesterday. The bill, still HB 11, although it's revised, passed out of the House Commerce Committee. Now, one of the things that I think is perplexing and frustrating about the situation in Santa Fe, well, there's a couple. So it went as originally organized or designed through health. They didn't change anything. They just passed it through. Then it goes to Commerce Committee, and it's practically a new bill for all intents and purposes. One Democrat, Albuquerque Representative Marion Matthews, opposed the bill, and it still passed out of committee with just the Democrats supporting it. but it doesn't have to go back to the health committee. In fact, the minority leader of the House Republicans, Gail Armstrong, urged the Democrats to make it go through appropriations because it has an appropriation in the bill, and it's going to be a huge financial obligation for the state of New Mexico. I don't think they're going to do that. They want to get it right to the floor. If it passes the floor of the House, I think it's a done deal. I think it's baked in because last year that's where this concept failed by 2 votes, and the Senate has seen some changes, but the Senate numbers on the Democrat side, there's just not enough moderates to go and push this thing and stop it. So, yeah, we're at a fraught time in terms of this legislation. One of the things, and unfortunately, these committees, and if you've ever been up there, the process is unfortunately just a joke. So, the chair of the committee counted hands on the opposing side and then gave the opponents of the bill, who numbered over 40, 2 minutes to testify, but only 10 of them, 10 opponents, actually 1 minute to testify, 10 of them in opposition. I was not able to essentially run to the microphone in time. Other people did. So I would have questioned the solvency aspects most critically, but also, if there is a solvency issue, there is no backstop. There is no prescription for how this system is to be funded. Is it just going to fall on the backs of the businesses and the employers? Will there be a lifeline from the general funds? Where does the money come from? And I think these are, this is like anything in politics. They want to get this thing through. It's, Nancy Pelosi famously said about Obamacare, we want to pass it so we can find out what's in it. This is very much along the same lines. They do not want to kind of pull the lipstick off the pig. They want to keep that lipstick on there and then get it passed, and then they'll figure out whether this thing is going to be a huge boondoggle or just a small boondoggle.
Right. Pass it, and then we'll fix it. I mean, they literally admit that it's not a great bill and that they'll fix it. It's kind of interesting, but that is like a very, very common politician theme, and mostly seems to be on the Democratic side. We've got a couple of minutes left, Paul. We really just we could talk forever and ever and ever. There's so much going on, and your expertise on the education is so great. But I got a couple more minutes. I just, before we have to close out, but I just want to give it to you to talk about whatever you want with the remaining legislative session that we have left.
Yeah, well, real quick, one thing that I talked about today in committee was a statewide plastic bag ban. And obviously that's kind of a new thing in Carlsbad. HB 392 is the bill. It did not pass yet out of House Energy and Environments. That committee is going to take a closer look because, again, this bill has some problems with it. Even if the Democrats do support the concept, there's concerns about some of the ways that it would interact with local plastic bag bans like the one in Carlsbad. And there was a individual from the city of Carlsbad who sadly testified in support of imposing a similar restriction as what's in Carlsbad across the state of New Mexico.
Yeah, her name is Mary Garwood, City Councilor, yes. Ward 3 here. Yeah. I'm very familiar with her. I interview her all the time. I interview her more than almost you, Paul, actually. You know what I mean? But yeah, I'm very familiar. I'm not surprised. I saw her up there.
Well, she's local. I get it. HB 392 is this bill, and we'll see if this thing has legs. That's not necessarily the most important bill, but it's something that I did get to testify against. And as I've noted in the past, New Jersey and California both have statewide plastic bag bans, which their own data has shown that they actually increase the amount of plastic waste because of some of the alternative bags that are handed out and used. So that's an issue. I was brought in as an expert witness. I mentioned Elaine Sena Cortez. She introduced the HB 275, which would eliminate the state income tax on personal income. And so I talked about budget situation and how we could do that. There's 9 states that have no personal income tax. 2 of those states, New Hampshire and Alaska, have no sales tax as well. New Mexico far outpaces any of them when it comes to the revenue and oil and gas picture. Now, it was widely expected. I didn't go into this expecting that the tax committee. So the tax committee is a unique deal. They table all the bills that have a fiscal impact, and then they put together a final tax package. Neither the legislature nor the governor have put any money for tax reduction in their budget. So we'll see if there's any tax reduction, let alone this particular piece of legislation. Now, New Mexico's personal income tax generates $2.1 billion, and that is less than the $2.7 billion general fund surplus we have. But it got a terrible fiscal note because there's a lot of tax credits and a lot of things that go through the income tax code, some of which are what are called refundable. They result in more spending. And those they are assuming would continue into the future. And that creates a problem when you look at the fiscal impact number. But it really boils down to, do your political leaders see government as limited and see returning money to the people as a benefit, or is this something where they would rather keep all the money? The 9 states, by the way, are Alaska, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, New Hampshire, Washington, Wyoming, South Dakota, and Nevada. Among the research items I brought to bear was that of the top 10 fastest population growing states in 2023, 4 of those are zero income tax states. Of the top 10 economic growing states, so GDP growth, 5 of the top 10 in 2023 were no income tax. That was Washington, Wyoming, Texas, Alaska, and Florida. So if you want to spur economic growth in the state of New Mexico, this would be a great idea and a great way to do it. There's obviously more than one way to generate economic growth, but it was, we tried to get bold solutions that'll actually work. And this would be something that we could easily do as a state if our politicians were willing to do it.
All right, Paul, we are just about out, man. Why don't you go ahead and give all the important things so people can find where you're at online, on social, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. Errorsofenchantment.com is where we blog and write about a lot of these policy issues, especially current issues going through the legislature. We have 3 different posts relating to the NAEP scores, and then 1 additional about the governor comments. Rio Grande Foundation.org is our main website, which right now has the Freedom Index and the votes that are coming in on these bills that are making their way to the floor. And you see how the legislators are voting on them, and you can find your individual legislators and drop them a line and say, hey, I saw you voted on this particular issue. I'm concerned, or I don't agree with you. They may be more receptive after the session, but it's an important tool that we have to really hold these people accountable for what's going on in Santa Fe and how that impacts folks in Carlsbad and across the state of New Mexico. So those are the 2. And then at Rio Grande FNDN is our Twitter or X handle. We're also on Facebook, and you can just find out all about us in all those different locations.
All right, Paul, I appreciate it. Once the session's over, let's try to sit down for an extended interview. I think the people down here really, really want to hear what you have to say and appreciate what you have to say. I just have a limited time, of course. So Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Johnny. Appreciate it.
You're listening to Community Forum on KCCC 930 AM, sponsored by Eddy County, honoring God, country, and family, thriving with industry since 1889.